do you normally picture when you're thinking of the British Empire? If you're like most, then it's probably of this overwhelming superpower invading countries and destroying all obstacles in their path. However, the history of the British Empire is much less the story of stormtroopers and Death Stars, and much more the story of a game of Jenga. To understand the British Empire, we need to understand the origins of the English Empire. After the Normans conquered England in 1066, they would go on to conquer in one form or another the rest of Great Britain. This, combined with lands they held in France, formed the First English Empire. But they had trouble holding on to a cross-channel imperium. Over the reign of several kings, they fought to maintain this empire, but eventually lost all the parts that are today part of France, with much of the blame being placed on King John. The English never gave up this idea of empire, and for the next century they focused on empire building at home, cementing their control of Wales and trying to get those ornery Scots to just give up already.
Brothers and sisters are natural enemies, like Englishmen and Scots, or Welshmen and Scots, or Japanese and Scots, or Scots and other Scots. Damn Scots! They ruined Scotland!
They made another attempt at getting their French Empire back in the aptly named 100 Years' War. Not only did this not work, but the ruling Plantagenet dynasty lost power, and it plunged the country into a civil war called the Game of Thrones. This eventually ended when Henry VII of House Tudor invaded England with his foreign army and dragon banners. This would be followed by Henry VIII, who decided to start a new church because
it's mostly changed because he won't annul my marriage to that half-barren, pig-faced Spanish bride of mine.
A century of messy religious conflict would ensure that England and Scotland became ardently Protestant, and after defeating the Spanish Armada, it was ensured that England would forever be ruled by Englishmen. England was then ruled by the Scottish Stuart dynasty. It was under a Scottish monarch that what we know as the British Empire began to take shape. They began colonizing the New World, and even though the people they sent there kept dying, but like an aspiring actress working at Starbucks in LA, they were waiting for the moment they hit gold. And just like most aspiring actresses in LA, it never happened. So the English colonists had to find real jobs and actually produce things of value. The colonies grew, and as they did, people back home worried that they may never be as great as Rome was, or even worse, that they would fail in the same way Rome did. This empire in the New World was precarious, with the British having to fight off such powerful enemies like France, Spain, and geography. After fighting several colonial wars, the British gained mastery over North America. I mean, Spain was still there, but by this point no one took them seriously anyway, so they really don't count. With only geography standing in the way between themselves and governing their empire, the British decided to assert more authority over their North American colonies. They had spent a butt ton of money fighting off the other European powers and thought that the colonists should pay their fair share. The colonists would not take this well. 13 of these colonies would join together to expel the British from most of what they had gained in the 7 Years' War. Who would have guessed that the Americans, just like the English, don't like taxes?
Who taught you how to do this stuff?
You, alright? I learned it by watching you.
This loss forced the British to rethink how they did imperialism. They began to allow more home rule in their colonies, but before they could put this lesson to work, they came into conflict with France, first against a regicidal republic, and then against a pretender monarch, Napoleon. After Napoleon was defeated, the British became the undisputed masters of the seas, not so much the lands. They tried to stay out of continental affairs, and like an upper middle class kid going to an out-of-state college, the British Empire once again tried to reinvent itself. The dream of dominating the Americas was gone, so they turned their attention to India. And this whole time, they were continually concerned about how to govern an empire. They tried to govern better in Australia and New Zealand, and they did, to an extent. At least the Maori didn't end up so bad, unlike the Native Americans, the First Peoples, or the Aborigines. Throughout the 19th century, the empire expanded, and as it did so, the cost of maintaining it grew, especially after Africa got involved. Germany came to the empire game late, and decided that because Africa was the only place left, that they would have to claim the colonies there. The British had done everything within its power to have a bare minimum presence in Africa, so when the Germans decided that they wanted to expand the colonial game to that continent, they felt that they had no choice but to claim as much of Africa as possible to stop the Germans from getting it. Similar tensions were felt with Russia and Central Asia. The Russians were still working towards their perpetual goal of accessing a warm water port, and therefore they were pushing southward through all the stands. This got the British worried because just below all these stands was India. So the British invaded Afghanistan not once or twice, but thrice. Technically 4 times if you include their involvement in the NATO invasion after September 11th. These invasions always proved fruitless, because no one wins a war in Afghanistan.
You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia.
The latter half of the 19th century was one of internal instability for the empire. Revolts in India, Africa, and China, as well as rising challengers in Europe, Asia, and America, made the British insecure about their position in the world. The empire had evolved from one based on protecting economic interests to one that was more concerned with politics. This set the stage for the World Wars, when they were willing to bankrupt themselves for the sake of a bunch of Belgians. This financially crippled the empire and made decolonization and the end of the empire inevitable. The fight against Hitler would be the last hurrah of the British Empire as a global power. So was the empire good for Britain? Well, they got a much needed influx of better tasting food, and to this day they are still one of the most economically powerful nations in the world. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is also yes, but with numerous caveats.